So we have started recording. I am Becky Turner from the Red Wing, Minnesota congregation, and I'm going to interview Marlene Palmer. Actually, we're going to have a conversation. So I have some questions that I wanted to ask her that I'd like her to share about her life, and probably particularly her life in our church. So I'm going to ask some specific questions, and then we might get off track. So Marlene, I'm going to start with my first question, which is, can you tell me about your religious upbringing as a child?
Okay, my father was a member of the First Lutheran Church, and I suppose that's how I got hooked up with the First Lutheran Sunday School. They had a building that was just a big square open inside building on the south side of Fargo, and it happened to be on the same street that I lived on. And either my mother or my dad would drive me down to the Sunday school when I was little, and then when I got to be 8 years old, I had my own bike, and then I biked myself to that Sunday school, except in the winter. And it was a big building inside, and it had draw doors across the middle, and all the kids that were in grade school were on one side of the draw wall that was pulled across, and the junior high and senior high were on the other side of the room. And we had little tiny chairs to sit on, I remember up front, and we'd have teachers telling us stories. And I remember I was so excited to get past that wall to get to the other side of the room because they all had big chairs sitting in circles of the grades, and they each had a teacher in four corners. And that was kind of my Sunday school life until probably sixth grade. I got a girlfriend that lived 4 blocks away, and their family invited me to go to the Presbyterian church with their kids. So I rode my bike down to their house and rode with the car to downtown Fargo. And that was the church I was married in. And that was a church when I was in junior high. I went through catechism lessons, and we had to memorize all the books of the Bible in order. We had to know the Beatitudes. We had to know the Ten Commandments, of course, and we had fun playing games. The pastor would name a scripture, and whoever could find it in their own Bible the fastest stood up and started reading it to win a point. And I like competition, of course, so I enjoyed having a game like that. But I felt that just in that year that we had catechism at the Presbyterian Church, I learned what I knew about the Bible the most from anywhere. I joined, we had a youth league there, and I played the piano for it. Well, I also played the piano for all the Sunday school classes. I had to take turns going to different rooms and playing for the kindergarten on up. And my high school band and orchestra leader had a daughter that was just excellent on the violin. She had won some competitions at WCCO here in Minneapolis. And I was so scared because they were asking her to play for Sunday school, and I had to be the accompanist. And I called her home to see if we could practice. And her dad answered, and he said, "Well, Barbara is a very good player," trying to dismiss me. And I said, "Well, I'm the one I'm worried about." I said, we never did get to practice, but we played just fine. But it
And
was
you,
kind of scary for me at my young age to accompany a girl that had won all those prizes.
so you started piano and other instruments quite early. What other instruments did you play?
I played the clarinet in band. I was in band till 2 years of college. I got to play first chair,
Wow.
and I like to play the melody rather than playing second or third clarinet.
So
Um,
what was you say you were married in the Presbyterian Church to, I'm presuming, Lee Palmer.
right.
And uh, what was your first interaction with the RLDS Church, now known as Community of Christ?
Well, when we were in Anchorage, Alaska, Lee was in the Air Force, and we went into um, a church in town there in Anchorage, and they met in a garage, and they had a pot-bellied stove in the back to heat it up. And I was not impressed because of what they had. I thought, gee, they don't care enough to have a nicer church or building, so we never went back.
Was that the
uh,
RLDS Church
yeah,
there?
yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So I missed out on meeting some very nice people because one of the women was a woman on the radio that gave recipes,
Oh,
and she was a very prominent member of our church. And I think she lived closer to Fairbanks than to Anchorage, and she drove in every day from, she probably halfway to Fairbanks or something. Lived in the
so
country.
why did you why did you go to that church to begin with the first time?
Well, my husband was a member of this church I think when he was in high school, he got baptized, and his mother found this church when she lived. Uh, oh, no, let's see now. It was his mother's sister that found this church. She married a man from Oklahoma that was a member, and so when Lee's mom went down to Minneapolis to meet with her for a vacation, they attended the Minneapolis church, and she got taken with it and decided that she'd like to be a member, and she got baptized. And she stayed with a family in Idaho that were members while she was teaching in Moscow, Idaho. And we never had a church, or Lee never had the church in his hometown, so he never really got to learn about it until I had my cottage meetings. Then he got all excited about it and really wanted to be active after that. So we started going to the Minneapolis church. And when I was having the cottage meetings, it was Delbert Smith lived in Minneapolis with Mildred, his wife, and they had like 5 kids, I think. And they were really close to moving away during my cottage meetings. And so John Whipple came in for the last couple meetings, but Dilbert got to baptize me anyway. I told him I wanted a private ceremony. It ended up that it was district conference Sunday, and everybody in the world was at my baptism.
Well, that's
Oh,
fabulous. So, what caused you guys to try the Minneapolis church? Because Lee's mother was going there when you moved to this area?
no, no, Lee's mother was up in Devil's Lake. Uh, I think Lee just wanted to try because he was a member, but never was active. And I think he knew his mother would like him to go. And the first Sunday we were there, Wes and Jay Alvin took us home to dinner. And we got acquainted with that family first. And then Doyle and Hazel Sundell took us home on another day. And Doug and Ann were only about 4 and 5 years old when we started going there. We were going to the Fifth and Queen Church that is no longer existing. I think they built some kind of an apartment house on that corner now. But
So the Doyle and Hazel Sundell and Wes and Jay Elvin have long histories in the Minnesota district and now Headwaters
yeah, they were
Mission
very,
Center.
very hard workers for everything.
Yes,
They
wonderful people.
never missed a prayer service, I'm sure.
Hmm. Well, can you share one or two special testimonies that maybe you have of God's influence or blessings in your life that stand out?
Well, when I was going through the cottage meetings, I think Delbert was telling about how Moroni was standing in the air in Joseph Smith's bedroom talking to him. And so Delbert had asked me to ask for help to decide whether this was my church or not. And so he asked after a few weeks went by if I was having any feelings or answers. And he said, well, what are you praying for? And I said, well, I was praying for Moroni to stand in the air in my bedroom. And he says, oh, no, no, no. He said, you don't do that. You pray for something that God can actually do using the people here on earth. He said, he suggested I ask for certain words to be said that just couldn't be denied. And so that night when I went to bed, I prayed for these certain words. And when Lee got home, he worked till 2 in the morning at my uncle's restaurant. And when he got home and got into bed, and he put his arm around me and he said the words exactly. And the words were, I know you're not making a mistake by joining this church. And
Wow.
he said all those words exactly. And all of a sudden, I felt like a hammer or a big sledgehammer hitting me on the top of my chest. Like, okay, did you hear that? You know, like God was making me sure I woke up and knew it. It was a physical uh, pain that hit me. It was so strong. And I think God has to work that way with me to get me to listen and hear.
That's amazing. Have you shared that testimony very often?
No, I told my kids though, and all my
Good.
kids are attending our church. So I'm glad I haven't lost my own kids.
Yeah. Well, is there anything else that you would want to share along those lines? Another testimony or anything?
Well, something happened or something didn't happen at my baptism. I didn't realize I was supposed to make some kind of a promise to God at baptism in order to receive the Holy Spirit. And so I told John Whipple when he was still there with us that I said, well, we got to do it all over again. We got to get baptized again. I didn't make any promise. And he said, oh, no, no. He said, that's what Communion Sunday is for. You pledge yourself all over again to God on Communion Sunday and you'll be fine. But that didn't satisfy me. And at one reunion, I was sitting towards the back because they had like a double door wide open, and the cabin we were in was right across from that door. And so I sat in the back so I could hear my kids didn't stay asleep or got up or made noise. And I was paying so much attention to the cabin, I wasn't really listening to the sermon. And all of a sudden came this sledgehammer again right through my spine, right down into the wooden bench I was sitting on. And so I turned my attention to the speaker all to see what in the world that was all about. And he left the podium and went over and made two fists with his hands and shook them towards the floor, saying, if you have the will to tell your neighbor, you have the gift of the Holy Spirit. And I thought, my goodness, the Lord had to sledgehammer me again to hear the words that I needed to hear to be comforted.
Wow, that is amazing. So have you shared that with your neighbor? I mean, have you shared the
No, I think
gospel?
I did with my family. I don't think I've never given, I've only given one sermon. That was in Red Ring. And what I talked about there was a lot of other things. I guess I
Well,
should have thought about
maybe
testimony.
maybe it's through your life, that testimony, because you've certainly gone to church many, many, many years, as long as you were physically able. And
Yeah,
sometimes when you weren't physically able, I think.
yeah, Lee'd always get me out.
So kind of going along those lines, this question's a little out of order from what I had told you, but how do you think we can share the gospel with others?
Well, I think that we should do more visiting.
Ah,
There has to be time spent outside of church hours because you just can't reach everybody during the church hour. And they used to have Tuesday evening visits where the
mm-hmm.
pastor would go. And I know Lee would always carry $100 bill with him in case there was any couples that needed extra money or were having a hard time. And I can talk more about the good that Lee's done than I've ever done, but he picked up a hitchhiker coming up from southern Minnesota that didn't have a winter jacket on, and it was really like only 30 degrees out. And here it was a young man from Africa going to the University of Minnesota, and Lee gave him $100 and said, you go get yourself a jacket. And so that 100 comes in handy when you have it handy
No
to
kidding.
help out.
That is a great story, but I know that you've always been uh, by Lee's side when he's certainly supporting him in any of his um, activities as a priesthood member or just as a member sharing with others. And that's a good example of it. And I know that when you owned the motel, you would certainly take in people without expecting payment many times. What do you think is important for Community of Christ to do nowadays?
Well, I think it should form more units, like people that are in the hospital, they need a visit. Doug never got a visit before he died,
Mm,
and I just thought that was so sad that they surely knew he was dying, but they didn't come to see him. And I think that if we could just assign different circles, because I know of a man that was almost 100, and his daughter needed help with him, and she just went ahead and telephoned up a bunch of people and said, "Please help me." It took calling and begging. It just wasn't there naturally. And I
that's a
think
very, very important thing, truly.
when we had women's meetings, I think we were all closer because we knew the families better, even with the visiting going on, before and after the women's circle meetings. They stopped all that, and they stopped the retreats that the men could get together and talk, as well as the women's retreats. And I think that's sad that that all went away because our population and membership was climbing during all those days, and now
Mhm.
it's just falling away. There's just not enough activity. But I know a lot of women have to work days and can't go to meetings. But there must be, I think there's some meetings going on like breakfast meetings,
Right.
but that's not like having something in a home. I remember we had Wednesday morning meetings in different homes when in St. Paul, and we were praying for four different husbands to join the church. And we came fasting and having our meetings for that. And we won all four men. They all
Oh,
joined the church. And I think there has to be more of that caring going on like that.
I think that's really important for people to hear and to know. Thank you for sharing that for sure. I'm going to pass on some of that information as well. Um, so who do you think was most influential uh, for you in church, other than your husband, Lee, um, in your church life? And maybe it was in your Presbyterian or Lutheran church.
Uh, no, I think Doyle and Hazel Sundell
Okay.
they were close to our age, and we did things with them. And Doyle and Lee went out to administer to people whenever they were sick. And Hazel and I did several years of bowling together.
Ah,
but
good.
but she came over to do my ironing for me when I broke my arm, and she drove
Wow.
clear to River Falls when we were living there.
Oh my gosh.
So, yeah, that was kind of a strange thing. broke the radio head on my elbow, and so my
Oh,
arm was in a cast. But I still played the piano for all the services. I had to.
oh, good grief.
I point my elbow up towards the sky and kept my
Oh,
hand down low.
oh
I even
my goodness.
I even played for a wedding looking like that.
Oh, good grief.
I even made the wedding cake for that wedding.
Oh, you made the cake?
Yeah.
Oh, good grief with your broken arm. Wow. Well, along those lines of the um, playing the piano, I know that you did it for many, many years, and we were talking before we started here. Tell me about your longevity as in music for the North Star District and then Headwaters.
Well, before the formation of the two states together and stuff, we had just the Minnesota district. And when we
Right.
were just a Minnesota district, I was elected the music chairman for 26 years in a row.
Wow.
Uh,
And what
I
all
think
did that entail that you had to do for that?
I had to select all the music for reunions and for all the district conferences. And besides that, I did the choir at the Minneapolis church, but that wasn't a part of the election. The election was for the district work. And I would spend almost all one day at Smith's Music trying to select the nicest music for reunions.
Hmm.
And then, of course, at reunion, I had to rewrite music for instruments that were going to play and rehearse people for their duets or whatever I had planned. And I have one story that doesn't compliment me, but I sent the words to the music I had selected for a district conference at Minneapolis Church to the speaker that was going to be coming up from Independence. And I wanted to know if that music was okay for him. Well, he never answered. And when he did come to speak, his whole sermon was about my music,
Oh,
using using all the scriptures that was in my music, and everybody in the choir wanted to know. They just thought that was a miracle, you know.
well, it was a miracle that it worked out, even though he didn't respond. He responded when he showed up, so
Yeah.
that's pretty amazing. So I guess one last thing, maybe, what do you think is important for others to know about you that maybe they don't know, the majority of people?
Oh, I guess I can't think of anything that they should know.
Well, what do you think maybe people don't? Well, maybe I'll lead it this way because I've known you for many years now. Um, I know you are a tremendous cook and a tremendous musician, obviously, and a tremendous comedian. So put those in order for me, first, second, and third, between cook, comedian, or musician.
Well, my hands are all crippled now, so the musician part is over with. I can't play any keys with my fingers. I really miss playing the piano so much. And I remember my husband had to hear my jokes over and over again, depending on how many people I told the same story to, so he had to put up with a lot. So it wasn't always happy for, for everybody. So I don't know. I don't get to get out or hear any stories or jokes anymore. So that's kind of done with, I guess. But
I think they all played a pretty important part of your life, though.
yeah, when I talk to somebody on the phone, I'd like to analyze whether they're happy today or are they down about anything, and I try to cheer them up with my jokes and stories before we hang up. And I just worry about people's feelings more than a lot of people, I think. But I wouldn't want to think I hurt anybody's feelings ever. I would like to be the cheerer upper.
And I think you've succeeded in that for sure, for sure. Well, I'm going to stop our recording here unless there's something else or anything else you would like to share, but you and I will continue talking after we end our recording. Is there anything else that you think we should know?
Well, it's just that Lee has spent his, he's given more than a lot of people to the church, and I know at the end he wanted us to have a building in Red Wing. That was the top of his mind, but the laws of Red Wing wouldn't allow him to buy a home for a church, but he wanted to anyway. But
And it's
I guess,
unfortunate that he didn't live to see where we are when we finally moved out of the St. James Hotel into
yeah, I
where
think
we
that too. Yeah.
are now for the past 10 going on 11 years now. We finally got our own space, even though we don't own it, but it's become our home now, our church home for sure. And it's not quite a garage with a pot-bellied stove.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Marlene. And as I say, I'm going to end this conversation, end the recording right now. But you stay on with me if you would, please.